Alright guys, so this morning I wanted to do something a little different than maybe other people have done. So what I thought of doing essentially for my video was kind of a oral report for everyone to kind of see my research, think about how it's, how I went about doing it and what I found. So we got a creepy old guy in the back. He's going to monitor over all of us, and I'm going to tell you about my research. Alright, so the thing I did was I looked at rhetoric and how high schoolers versus college students use it, and kind of what they thought rhetoric was, what their definition of, and what training they have on it. So first I surveyed some high schoolers, just a basic survey, and the first question I asked was, what do you think rhetoric is? And the responses were pretty varied, but for the most part they actually kind of missed the mark, the high schoolers. Most high schoolers, which was about 8 out of 10, thought that rhetoric was some big lofty college class type thing that they hadn't used yet or didn't know what it was yet, or even if they did kind of know what it was, they didn't give a great definition of it. So you had responses like, I think it's like really advanced arguing, which I guess is kind of correct, but a little bit off the mark. And then what I did is I gave them a definition of rhetoric that I kind of compiled from Lindemann's textbook. And then they were like, oh, well, yeah, we've kind of talked about that. And so what I found is that they have talked about it a little bit in class, or maybe they've used it in a paper, but it's not a conscious thing. It's not something they realize up front. So what was happening in those classes was that when they were writing a paper, yeah, they might be using rhetoric, but it wasn't consciously. It was, oh, they're trying to prove a point. But it wasn't a conscious thing that they were like, ooh, what audience am I addressing? How am I going to argue? How am I going to prove points to certain people? So that was a little different. Then I surveyed college students. I got 8 people from VMI to take this same survey, and especially I had 4 English majors, and they knew what rhetoric was, which is good, moving into the rhetoric department and whatnot. But they knew what rhetoric was, but again, it wasn't as conscious when they were using it in their papers. So a lot of the kids, about 7, gave pretty good definitions of rhetoric. I thought there was something like, well, rhetoric is how you argue a paper, how you prove a point, how you address certain audiences, things like that. Those were all brought up when I asked people. Then I again showed them, even though they got it for the most part right, I gave them a definition of rhetoric from the textbook and said, do you use this in your paper, or have you talked about this in your classes? And for the most part, the ones that had taken liberal arts courses, or and everyone's taken writing 101, 102, they had talked about it in a class, which was a good sign, I thought, that we are learning. This guy in the back is really creeping me out. Okay, so they are learning what rhetoric is, but the problem is, the thing that we're running into, or maybe the reason people's rhetoric isn't as strong in their papers, is that they're not consciously thinking about it in steps like pre-writing. So I think one space to go with kind of my survey to expand it would be to look at, well, what's your pre-writing like? What's your writing process like, just throughout, from the time you get the assignment to the time you turn in the paper? And I think that would really show the development of rhetoric in a paper, or the lack thereof, because I think a lot of the times, a lot of the problem with what the kids I saw was, in their papers, they weren't consciously thinking about using proper rhetoric, or not proper, but good rhetoric, when they were working through their writing process, and that led to a weaker argument overall. And so if we want to produce papers that are going to present better arguments, then we're going to have to increase our rhetoric, and our learning of rhetoric, and our use, more than anything, our use of rhetoric. So that's what I have for you today. Have a great rest of the class.